before we can delve into the question of whether the state bank has any independent authority to release these funds, let's take a look at what the Federal Consolidated Fund is and how does it work. Now, the Federal Consolidated Fund was established pursuant to Article 78 subclause 1 of the Constitution. And basically, any money coming into the government, any revenue or any loans raised by the government forms part of this fund. Article 79 of the Constitution speaks to the custody of this fund, and it says that management of this fund shall be regulated by an act of parliament, and if there is no act, then rules made by the president. However, as we stand today, we have an act called the Public Finance Management Act of 2019. And under Section 22 of this Act, now this is important, under Section 22 of this Act, the operational authority of the Federal Consolidated Fund rests with the Finance Division under the overall supervision of the federal government. Now, Section 23 of this Act talks about how expenditures can be made from the Federal Consolidated Fund, and it says that no authority can incur or commit any expenditure from the Federal Consolidated Fund until the same has been sanctioned by a competent authority, and that expenditure has been provided for the financial year through a schedule of the authorized expenditure, or, now this is important, supplementary grant as per Article 84 of the Constitution. Now, going back to the Constitution, Article 84 basically speaks to supplementary and excess grants. So, in simple terms, if in respect of any financial year, the government has spent more money than it had budgeted for in the budget, or a need has arisen for a new expenditure which was not included in the annual budget, then the federal government has the power to authorize that expenditure. However, the federal government is mandated to obtain approval from the National Assembly through a supplementary budget statement or an excess budget statement, depending on the technicalities. Now, all of this is very important when we go back to the Supreme Court's order. If we take a look at the Supreme Court's order, it is not only the state bank that is being issued directions to release these funds, which in itself makes it very clear that the state bank has no independent authority to release its funds. If we look at the scheme or the scheme of instructions that has been laid out by the Supreme Court, it says that the State Bank of Pakistan shall allocate and release rupees 21 billion for these elections and send an appropriate communication to the Finance Ministry or Division, which is basically recognition of the fact that the Federal Consolidated Fund is operated or under the supervision of the Finance Ministry. And then the Finance Ministry will then issue the requisite directions to the Accountant General Pakistan Revenue Office. So the Supreme Court, so when we now look at the entire scheme of the law through the Constitution, through the Public Finance Management Act, and through the Supreme Court's order, the State Bank of Pakistan has no independent authority to release its fund. It is still dependent on the Finance Division and the federal government to authorize this expenditure to the Federal Consolidated Fund. Now, whether the Finance Division complies with the Supreme Court's order is a different question, but just in terms of the legal picture, the state bank in itself cannot release the funds without having the federal government's approval. And one last thing, this is something that the Supreme Court itself has also recognized, that any expenditure that the federal government makes with regards to these elections will need to be authorized or approved by the National Assembly under Article 84 of the Constitution through an ex post facto approval through a supplementary budget statement. So, in terms of just looking at the entire scheme of the law, the state bank in itself does not have any independent legal authority. It requires approval from the Finance Division, and then that expenditure has to be, maybe if not now, at some point in the future, approved by the National Assembly.